Welcome, Ant Murphy, to Love Innovating Again. Very, very excited that you're here, Ant.
Yeah, excited to be here. Always good.
Now, Ant, it'd be great to hear what you're doing now and what you used to do.
Yeah. I'll give a condensed version of it because we can give a whole life story, I guess. So right now, I'm a product coach, also the founder of Product Pathways, which is a platform that's focused on helping product people master the craft of product and be able to build better products. And the two things go together really well because product coaching is the other side. I guess I call that my day job, and the other pathway is my evening job. But my day job is working with clients, working with companies, helping them do product, helping them build better products, implement better product practices. So it all ties together. Previously, I've been a product manager. I've had a bunch of other roles. I've been a developer. I've been very briefly a business analyst. I was an agile coach for a little bit, but I've spent a lot of time in this innovation space, in the product development space. And that's really been my career in that, and worked at a lot of different companies and helped them ship different products, and I guess have some of those challenges around not being able to be innovative, as well as some of the great aspects of being able to be innovative and do that well.
Yeah, beautiful. So you've just outlined the pathway of a lot of innovation and product people. It's never a straight line, is it?
No. It's funny because like the accidental product manager quote, but I just think career paths are like that. They're non-linear.
Yeah, absolutely. It's only in looking back that you can kind of see the connective tissue.
Yes.
So, what problems are you seeing across all of the consulting engagements that you undertake, and also that maybe product managers that you coach are having?
Yeah, I think on that one, my brain initially went towards the more larger corporate clients that I have. So think large enterprises, generally categorize that as more older incumbent organizations, generally over 1,000 people, often several thousand people. A lot of their challenges is when you said it, I thought about them because they are having this challenge around not just innovation, but trying to stay relevant, trying to adapt to the market. If you think about, you use the word connective tissue, and you made me think about an organization's connective tissue, and they can spend decades working in a certain way that maybe, there wasn't a lot of competition. Now there's a lot of competition. Technology has enabled that. As I gave a talk the other week, and they're a financial services company. And if you think about once upon a time, in order to build another bank or another financial services company, you needed to have the capital. You still need the capital, but you needed to have extra capital to be able to get branches and get, or even storefronts, brick and mortar. Even think about like e-commerce, right? How that's changed the game there. And today you don't need any of that. You just need the capital to be able to fund it. And then you can be completely digital, and you can steal their customers. And that's what's happening today. Like they're losing customers, losing market share. Not all of them, but for a lot of them. And I think a lot of their challenges is trying to stay relevant. And I think the challenges break down into many different things. It's not just the tangible things, like how do we keep our products and services relevant? It also comes back to, we're moving into a different world and a different paradigm with hyper-connected, complex, volatile stuff. And that also means that we need to think differently. We need to behave differently. And that brings another challenge, because it's not just like, how do we change what we have? It's also like, how do we change how we go about doing it? And the connective tissue thing that I was thinking about, that's hard to break, right? Like it's molded in a certain way.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it really is hard to break. Having done several large transformations and, worked from an entrepreneurial perspective for my whole career, whatever your biggest challenge is always how to influence people to actually just give something a go. Especially in bigger organizations, people have been there for a long time and they've lived through lots of change. And so the incentive to change has to be really strong for people to kind of even say, yeah, I'll give this a go. So, yeah.
And it's when you're at the top too, like when you have had decades to build a multi-billion-dollar business and you're at the top, like of the hierarchy, I guess, or the peak at the summit, it's so easy to think, well, why do we need to change? We're at the top. We're billions of dollars. We've been successful in the past. And the way that we worked in the past has made us successful. So that it's like a reinforcing loop, which is even harder to break.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. But I think your point around customers is really important. So, one of the things that that organizations have is the customer base. And sometimes, there's a tendency to to be a little bit flippant and a little bit fickle about that. Whereas for startups and for scale-ups, the customer's there for the taking, but for corporates, they're already there and they just need a little bit more love sometimes to keep that journey going. At the end of the day, your customer base is going to make or break you. So what are a couple of the go-to tools and technique that anyone who's in a change-making role should have in their kit bag?
Yeah. So if we focus on change makers and people trying to make change in the organization, one thing is a principle of mine. You could argue it's a tool, but it's probably more of a principle, which is to show, don't tell. Now, telling is a component of it. Like we absolutely need to do that. I'd probably use the word don't to be a little bit, maybe deliberately provocative, so you remember it. But like telling is absolutely part of it. But we can spend forever trying to convince an organization to change, trying to convince people to give it a go, as you mentioned. But ultimately, the best way to do it is to find some people who are willing to give it a go, to do it, and then to be able to show the rest of the organization that, hey, this works. It's not just crazy. It's not something that only tech companies or Google can do or whatever. Insert a brand there. It actually works, and it can work, and it can deliver better outcomes or whatever. And showing is always just a great way to be able to make things happen in an organization. If you start small, like a fire, like kindling, and it kind of gets bigger and it spreads. That's how I always think. And it actually works. I mean, I've done that multiple times now and I've seen that work. I think that's definitely a tool to have in the kit bag. The other things that come to mind around change is I approach it very much like a product. Like I just think like change is the product, and then all these people in the organization is like my customer base. And as a result of that, you approach it from the perspective of, well, why don't I spend some time doing discovery, understanding our customers, understanding what's happening in the organization today? And that helps you uncover opportunities and helps you be able to tackle those. Because I guess like when it comes to change too, and I've seen this happen, like companies adopt some type of tool and they're not really clear on the problem that tool is solving, which is just like building a product that doesn't really solve any problems for our customers, and then hoping that customers are going to buy it and adopt it. It's like, well, no surprise they don't. Same thing happens inside organizations. And then they get into this kind of mess where they think it's a training issue. Like people just need to learn how to use the tool, or they think it's an enforcement issue. We just need to make people do it. And you can make people do it, but people will do it because their performance or whatever is tied to it, not because they actually believe that they should do it and the value that it provides. So I think, again, approaching it that way and then being able to solve problems is just so good to be able to even get buy-in, right? Like they understand it. And even on that one, it's also like with the tying the two together, if you start small and like kind of scale what works, which is the same, right? Like we test, we iterate, we prototype, same thing, approach it the same way.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, it's interesting. I mean, there's so many tactics to try. I sometimes analogize innovating and changing in organizations with parenting.
Yeah, for sure.
For each kid it's different, but at the end of the day, you've got a few things in your kit bag, but you don't have a lot. So you've got to be creative.
Yep.
The carrot or stick only goes so far, and so you've got to be creative to really understand the soul of the organization, to then be able to really ignite that fire that you mentioned.
Yeah, and they're all very similar. And when you think about it, when you said that, it also made me think, also acknowledging that you're going to get it wrong and like you're going to make mistakes and you're going to do something and try it, it's not going to work, but that's part of the process. Like the process is trying things and finding what doesn't work, so then you can eventually find what does work. Like that is the whole process.
Yeah, absolutely. And doing that in small ways, so you're not burning all your time and people and money. So just, you kind of mentioned methods a couple of times, methodologies. So do you advocate an organization has one sort of product and innovation and delivery method, or what's your thinking on that?
Yeah, I mean, so I think my thinking on this is like, it's really important for an organization to clarify how stuff happens in the organization, and how do we try to innovate? How do we try to build better products? What is the process? That is really important, because clarity is really important. I'm less wedded to like, here is a framework you must adopt, and this is the exact framework. In fact, I actually think that's counterintuitive to clarity, because clarity also means making it work for you and your context. So I think it's really important, even if it's like 90% the same as some other type of framework that's out there. That's okay as long as you spent the time to actually contextualize it to your company and actually make it our own. And then even if it works out to be the same. And the reality is most things do end up being very similar anyways. You think about the design thinking process, or breaking that down even further, like the process of divergent and convergent and doing that over and over again as a first principle, I guess, and why that's so important to innovation, because we want to explore and we want to go broad and be able to pick multiple, look at multiple opportunities, try and find untapped things that we're not, we might be missing, try and avoid premature convergence on an idea. All those things are important, not just for creativity and innovation, but that's just like a very important principle. So if you almost strip everything back, regardless of what you call it, you're going to have some type of diverging, converging, double, triple, quadruple diamond type thing. You're going to do very similar things inside any type of design thinking or discovery type process. They're all going to look very similar, and there might be some minor tweaks. But I think those minor tweaks are important because that then contextualizes it to your company. And also, I think there's a sense of ownership too. And like, hey, we did this and we shaped it, and things that you come up with always stick better. Like, it's hard to remember something, but if you created it, I remember like, I guess I want to be rock star at heart. I got some guitars sitting behind my computer right now, but I remember when I was learning ages ago, when I was a teenager, I was thinking, how do like musicians remember like the hundreds of songs in their head? But then when you start writing your own songs, not that I've written a lot of songs, but like you start realizing that is much easier to remember than trying to memorize somebody else's song because you created it. And I think that the same principle kind of goes here.
Yeah. Design is always much more successful. And as you're saying, telling people, saying, ta-da, here's the process that we're using. Yeah, I mean, I find that anywhere I go, usually have to either create an end-to-end approach or tweak it.
Yep.
And at the end of the day, the names for the stages and the names for the techniques might be a little bit different, but they're effectively always the same. You're kind of looking for something, looking for a problem or opportunity, working out some ways to solve that through different ideation, etc. Doing some kind of validation to make sure that this works for you in terms of your strategy, customer requirements, finances, etc. Determining whether you can do it, working out how to do it, doing it, launching it, seeing whether it works or not, and what do you need to do, and then retiring it if it needs to. And then along that end-to-end approach, there's all sorts of different things that you can call those steps, but that's effectively the same process for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's where I focus more on like principles and stuff there. And like, that's why I say, like, when you strip it apart, there's just that constant divergent and convergent. And as long as we're doing that, and as long as we're doing some of those other principles, like we're trying to start with a problem, we're trying to de-risk, we're trying to validate things, we're trying to converge, so ideation's a divergence thing. As long as you're doing that, the process ends up looking, as you said, much looks the same, and that's okay. And there's like some small nuances, and that's okay. But yeah, the co-creation is so important. I think, and that's why I would never. You almost wonder if it's, well, I think it's inefficient. Not that I wonder that it's inefficient. I know it's inefficient, but is it more is what I'm getting at. 90% of companies that are good at innovating and creative and deliver great experiences do this. So copy this. But that would be far less effective than, hey, let's go through the messy process of renaming things and creating it ourselves. And that'll be far more effective. So yeah, I index that way. That's probably another principle of mine too, which is like, I try to chase efficiency a lot less than I chase effectiveness. I do think innovation is inefficient by nature. It's messy. It takes time. We're going to spend a lot of time diverging. And you're like, why are we spending all this time diverging? And I talk a lot about explore versus exploit and those two different modes and that whole continuum and trade-off. And explore by nature is very inefficient. It's like, what are you doing? Oh, I'm just playing with AI so I can explore it. It's like, wait, you're going to spend all this money to just play with AI? And what are you trying to do? I'm just trying to learn more about it. And hey, 1 out of 100 times we do that, we might learn something that's actually worth chasing. But if we never do that, we never get the 1 in 100. But the 1 in 100 feels super inefficient.
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, when you look at the stats, especially if you look at Alberto Savoia, for example, he has some really good product maths. I don't know if you're familiar with his product maths video series. And that's a really good thing to kind of have a look at in terms of the crapshoot that's going on. But it's a necessary process to get to the real diamonds in the rough, if I can mix my metaphors. Because yeah, I agree. I think that part of the thing that drives people who want to innovate and create is that searching for that one thing that might eventuate. But equally, that's the part that's hard, because you have to be resilient and creative and have a lot of energy and enthusiasm, but also be a good influencer to explain to people that whilst this is not an exact science, there is some scientific thinking behind it, and we will get there. We're just not quite sure where yet, or when, or how, but it's kind of having that faith.
Yeah, faith. I love that you said faith, because I often talk about this as like having conviction. And like, it's one of the things that falls into the realm where you just got to believe. And it's hard because you have to believe, because exactly what you said, we don't know when, we don't know exactly what, but we will get this eventually, and we'll get something. I don't know if it will be in a month. I don't know if it'll be in 10 years, God forbid. And then that conviction and that belief to just carry through and keep investing into it regardless is such an important aspect.
Yeah, beautiful. So how do you keep yourself curious about the world, and so that you can continue helping others create and be productive?
Yeah, I love this question, because I think this is really important. In fact, there's a really good book called Range by David Espin, and he talks about like generalists and where generalists rule in a specialized world. And in fact, he talks about how there's a lot of research to suggest that generalist people are really good problem solvers and abstract thinkers. And so I think curiosity, if you want to be really creative, the whole book's about innovation, really. He talks about how generalists are great at innovating. They find new uses for old things and old technology. What does he call it? Like innovation with old technology or something like that. I think he calls the chapter. So I think being curious is so important. For me, I've reflected on this. I am a curious person in general. If something piques my interest, and I'll chase the thread, and I'll go and I read a lot. I've picked up podcasts actually, which is interesting. Kind of a behavioral change for me that's happened over the last 12 months. I try to make sure I push myself out of my comfort zone. So I try not to just read and listen to the same thing. So whilst most things I read and listen to fall in the realm of product and business and leadership, and innovation sits inside that, but I try and push myself out. I did a talk at a design guild the other week, and the design ops manager told me that I was the most design-centric product person she's met, because I know a lot about design and design thinking and different design disciplines and that type of stuff. But that's because that's actually something I've not only have been interested in, but I've also pushed myself to learn a bit more about, because I was an engineer and then a product manager. So I was like, well, design out of the trio is the thing that's missing for me. So I deliberately went and did a bunch of design courses and pushed myself to learn more about that space and spend time with them. So I try to be balanced and not just sit in my home base where I like. And the other things I do is when I am researching, I try to build the habit of, it's so easy to Google things from a confirmation bias perspective, right? Like, is this true? Or like, do, whatever, really have this? So I always try and catch myself and at least spend some time framing it, like just inverse what you're going to Google, and like try and find some counter arguments to what I'm learning about. So if we say that collaboration is really good for innovation, well, let's go Google some stuff about, is collaboration terrible for innovation? What are the reasons why collaboration might be really bad for innovation? And deliberately try and push myself down that way, just because I want to avoid that confirmation bias. And again, that's probably another way I force myself to try and stay curious. Yeah, why don't I chase the opposite to what I'm trying to learn here and see if I uncover something that's of interest? And it comes back to how you validate ideas and test them. Like, design things and come up with ideas like you're right, but you should always be challenging them and testing them like you're wrong. So I try and practice that as well with my own research. Beyond that, I try and give myself a lot of exposure. So that's also why I love what I do today, and why I made the leap, and I just couldn't see myself going back. I have the absolute privilege to have these types of conversations. I have the privilege to talk to so many different people all over the world every day, and I get exposed to their contacts, and they're going to tell me things, and I'm going to learn more about their businesses or whatnot. And that's just such another great way. Just exposure and push yourself out. Yeah.
Beautiful. So I love Range as well. I think that's a great book. I have been known to talk about how I wake up every morning saying, what am I going to do with my life? And that's because, like you, I'm driven to so many different things, which are so interesting and together make a good package. But sometimes that big sigh you have to take to explain what do I do, you think, oh gosh, here I go again. But I'm getting clear on that, and I loved that book, so I'd recommend that too. And then the other thing that I thought that was really interesting in terms of what you're saying is that when you're creating hypotheses, the practice ideally is that you're creating the falsifiable hypothesis as well. And so often people forget that or think, oh, actually, we won't worry about that because it's taking us a while to run the experiments. But it's really important to at least do that thinking so that you've got the yin and the yang articulated to be able to test as you go.
Yeah, absolutely. And the same goes for people. Like if you're going to do a round of user tests and interviews, it's also selection in those people. I had a recent story, actually, a senior PM told me that he was just looking at this research they did, the design team. This is not their fault, but they only spoke to current customers who like recently became customers. So not only are they current customers, they're also like recent. So there's generally an element of honeymoon period where like they just got in, they just got excited, they're getting the thing out of it, versus maybe the people who are more inactive and they've been around, like zombie users, as I like to call them, that just hang around and they're really just waiting to cancel whatever, like if it's a subscription or something, they're just waiting to cancel it. So there's a whole spectrum of people. And then you've also got non-customers, people that decided to not go with you, went with a competitor. Well, why don't we get their opinion on it? Because their opinion's super valuable.
Yeah, absolutely. You're kind of wanting to validate as well as invalidate as much as possible.
Absolutely.
And you somewhere in the middle is that goal that we're talking about. Yeah.
It just sitting in my head. That tension between the stuff that you validated and invalidated. I wrote this blog article. Again, another thing I got interested in, I was watching some like National Geographic thing on TV, and they were talking about these edge effects. So if you Google edge effects, it's a natural phenomena where basically different environments touch together. So it can be as simple as like a creek and like a forest meets the creek. So there's water and then there's no water. But it can be as extreme as like oasis, right? Like you've got desert and then you've got like jungle or something like that, or forest. Inside those edge effects, it has the greatest level of biodiversity. It has the most fauna and flora. They're super rich. And the reason for that is because there's like this conflict and there's this tension between it. And it's supporting both kind of wildlives. I think it's a great analogy for innovation, because I remember when I was watching it, I was like, oh, this is great. And I drew some parallels. I had this great mentor who was a design lead. And he said to me, during discovery, when you synthesize and doing research, we're looking for what I would now call edge effects. We're looking for points of tension. One customer said they loved this. The other customer said they absolutely hated the same thing. That inside that tension lies opportunity. Inside that tension lies the opportunity to innovate too. Because how might we continue to satisfy these people whilst rectifying whatever annoys these people? And those challenges, those constraints, that pressure cooker that tends to drive innovation. You look at a lot of research around innovation during financial crisis and recessions and those types of things, because it brings in constraints. It's very easy when you have luxury of all the time in the world and all the money in the world to just take your time and waffle and not really challenge your thinking. When you challenge your thinking, you build those constraints. That's when you start to think outside the box. It becomes a forcing function to do that. So when you mention it, I was like, absolutely, that validate, that invalidate, bringing them together, that is the goal. And I think that's a real skill. I think that's something to look out for. It's something as a practitioner you should think about, like look for these edge effects. As same goes for outliers. So another thing to learn how to look at data, but outliers are often edge effects as well. There's someone over here, some weird outlier. And what you might find in that outlier is they're adapting your product or whatever it is for their needs, which is just not what you designed it for. That's an opportunity. Imagine now looking at that market that you've never marketed to, because you only have one customer doing it and nobody else is doing it because you're not actively marketing to them. They just in their head worked out, hey, I could use your product for this thing and I'm just going to like bastardize it and make it work. Huge opportunity. Whole new market segment, possibly whole new product offering even. I don't know. But it's worth exploring. Too often we ignore it because we just look at the bell curve, we just look at what 90% of customers are doing, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, edge effects.
Yeah, great. Love it. I've been speaking to quite a lot of people actually about kind of, casting back into nature for learning, especially around systems and the way that different species and different ideas survive. So yeah, I love adding an edge effect to this as well. I think it's beautiful. The other thing I was thinking about then is for people who are in the day-to-day and thinking, this innovating is really hard. And knowing that the path that we've just laid out isn't a smooth one from a career perspective, but also from an opportunity perspective. What are some things you suggest that people do if they're in that kind of situation?
It's a really good question. And I say it's a good question because it's making me really reflect and think. What would I do is what I then started to think. Small wins is always part of it. You need to feel like you're making momentum, and you need to feel like there's an element of progress. You need to feel like you're having some success. There's a lot of literature around that as well. When they look at like people enjoyment at work, progress, success is always a part of it. That comes down to also celebrating the small wins. And the small wins could just be like, hey, we got this really interesting opportunity or this really interesting insight. Like, that is a win, because it's like, well, if we didn't do whatever we just did in order to get that insight, we wouldn't have this insight. Now, that insight might turn out to be nothing. That's the big challenge with this whole thing, is you could chase it down and then realize, actually, we got excited about nothing. But I think in that moment, when you are excited, like live in that moment and take it in and let that remind yourself that that's a win and that's a good thing and that's progress as well. And then even when you do kill it, that's when I get into the progress side. I'll be like, that's also progress. So now we've learned what not to do. Let's not go down that path. Like, what's next? And there's an element of process of elimination that goes on as well. They're the things that I was thinking about. I do think having fun is a crucial part of being creative and innovative as well. The best team, I think we were the most creative, we were the most innovative, we delivered the best products, were the teams I had the most fun with. There were also the teams where I enjoyed the people I worked with. Now, this is a hard thing for you to change, because if you're working with people you don't enjoy working with, that's tough because you can't fire them. You could quit and try and find a new job, I guess. But if you are in that space, index on that. Like, if you do have people that you do enjoy working with and you have fun with, index on that. Maybe even try and bring a little bit of fun into the process. And yeah, they're the things that came to mind. What else would I say? I think the conviction thing we talked about before is the other thing. Like, almost ground yourself back into that. Like, it's working. We're getting there. This is part of the process. I mean, I always talk about that when you're divergent and convergent, there's like that messy middle, which in the diamond of participation, they call it the groan zone, where it's painful because now all you've done is you've created all of these opportunities. You're like, how am I going to decide where to go? And it just feels painful because nobody can agree. One person wants this way and you want this way, and other people got another opinion. But I always remind teams and remind myself when I'm in that moment, this is part of the process. This is the growing zone. This is the crux between divergent and convergent. And it's messy and it's not easy, but we'll get through it. And next week, I'll forget about this moment. I'll forget about my frustration. And next week, we'll be focused on something. We'll be driving towards something. Yeah.
Beautiful. I say that there's no success without laughter.
Yeah.
One of the principles. So I agree. And I think you've kind of brought us back to the edge cases, because one of the things that people talk about a lot as well, and we've experienced, is, when do you stop testing? So you can continue to validate for a long time, but there comes a point at which we have to make a decision. And so it's kind of understanding where are you getting enough signals of a place to take a punt, to be able to determine. So sometimes it is really saying, well, in other times when I've been successful, this was kind of the lead up. And so I'm going to guesstimate, I'm going to place a few bets here. And yeah, that's the joy, but also that frustration that it'd be great if there were a better way to kind of assess if something was going to work.
Yeah. I mean, like, wouldn't it be amazing? We'll all be billionaires because we all have perfect ideas that are the next Facebook or whatever it is, right? Yeah,
But that's also where the joy comes.
yeah, I agree.
There's always what's that phrase? It's always darkest before the dawn.
Yeah.
Yeah. Beautiful. So I feel like I've shared a few metaphors.
It's a metaphor episode. Love it.
And I've really enjoyed talking to you, and loved the energy and the insight that you bring, which is sort of really principle led, but also is really inspired by your indefatigable curiosity. So yeah, it's been lovely. So thanks so much for your time.
No, thank you. Thanks for having me. It's been lovely as well. Talk about this stuff for days. Definitely passionate about it. So yeah.
Beautiful.